my third period history class. Mr. Parker was going over something boring about ancient civilizations, and I wasn't really paying attention. I was sitting near the back of the classroom next to my friend Nick. Nick and I were kind of the same, just coasting through school, not really taking much seriously. We were passing notes back and forth about some dumb YouTube video when suddenly the loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention teachers and students," the voice said. It was the principal. "We are going into lockdown. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." My heart sank. Everyone in the room froze. We'd had lockdown drills before, but this felt different. There was something in the principal's voice, something serious. Mr. Parker didn't waste any time. He immediately locked the door and turned off the lights. "Everyone, get to the back of the room and stay quiet," he whispered urgently. We all scrambled to the back, crowding together in the corner. I was squished between Nick and a few other kids, all of us trying to stay as quiet as possible. The room felt claustrophobic with everyone huddled so close, and it was so silent I could hear my own breathing. Mr. Parker crouched near us, glancing at the door every few seconds. His face was tense. We all knew something serious was happening, but no one said anything. We just waited. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The only sound was the occasional creak of the building and the hum of the air conditioning. My mind raced with possibilities. Was there a shooter in the school? Was someone hurt? The fear in the room was almost tangible. Then we heard it. A knock. It was soft at first, just a few light taps on the door. Everyone stiffened. Mr. Parker held up his hand, signaling for us to stay silent. The knocks came again, this time louder, more insistent. "Officer Daniels," a voice called from the other side of the door. "It's safe now. You can open up." Officer Daniels was the school's resource officer. We saw him around all the time. Tall guy, mid-40s, friendly but serious when he needed to be. His voice was unmistakable. Mr. Parker didn't move. He stayed crouched next to us, shaking his head slowly. "It's not safe yet," he whispered, barely loud enough for us to hear. The knocks became more aggressive. "Mr. Parker, it's Officer Daniels. Open the door now. Everything's under control." I glanced at Nick and he looked as confused as I felt. It sounded just like Officer Daniels, but something was off. The way he was knocking, the way he was insisting, it didn't feel right. Mr. Parker didn't budge. He stayed where he was, his eyes glued to the door. The knocking kept going, growing louder and more forceful. The door rattled in its frame, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "Mr. Parker!" the voice shouted. "Open this door now!" But Mr. Parker still didn't move. We were all terrified, barely daring to breathe. The knocking continued for what felt like forever. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. No one moved, no one spoke. We just sat there in the dark, waiting, listening. After what felt like an eternity, the loudspeaker crackled again. "Attention students and staff," the principal's voice said. "The lockdown is over. Repeat, the lockdown is over. It is safe to resume your normal activities." No one moved at first. We were all too scared to believe it. But eventually, Mr. Parker got up and walked over to the door. He looked through the small window before slowly unlocking it. The hallway outside was empty. There was no sign of Officer Daniels or anyone else. We all started to get up, still shaken, as we gathered our things and filed out of the room. The atmosphere was tense, everyone whispering to each other, trying to figure out what had just happened. Nick and I walked down the hall together, but he was quieter than usual. Normally, he'd make a joke or try to lighten the mood, but he didn't say a word. I asked him if he was okay, and he just nodded, his face pale. When we got to the main office, we saw Officer Daniels standing there, talking to a couple of teachers. He looked perfectly calm, like nothing had happened. I overheard him saying, "We've cleared the building, everything's fine now." I wanted to ask him what the hell was going on, but before I could, I noticed something weird. Nick wasn't next to me anymore. I looked around, but he was gone. I thought maybe he'd gone to the bathroom or something, so I didn't worry too much at first. But as the day went on, I didn't see him again. He didn't show up for lunch, and he wasn't in any of our afternoon classes. By the time the last bell rang, I was really starting to get worried. I texted him, but he didn't reply. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. I even asked a few of our other friends if they'd seen him, but no one had. I figured maybe he'd gone home early or something, so I didn't think too much of it. But the next day, when he didn't show up for school at all, I started to panic. I went to the main office and asked if they knew where Nick was. They said he hadn't been marked absent, which didn't make any sense because he wasn't there. Finally, during lunch, I saw him. He was standing by the entrance to the school, just staring out at the parking lot. I rushed over to him, relieved but also confused. "Dude, where have you been?" I asked. "I've been looking for you all day." He looked at me, but something was off. His face was pale, his eyes distant. "I'm fine," he said quietly. "Are you sure? You've been acting weird ever since the lockdown." He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring out at the parking lot like he wasn't even listening to me. I tried asking him again, but he just shrugged and walked away. For the rest of the week, Nick barely talked to anyone. He showed up to class, but he wasn't really there, if that makes sense. He just kept to himself, not saying a word to me or anyone else. One day after school, I cornered him in the hallway and demanded to know what was going on. "Nick, seriously, what happened during the lockdown? Where did you go?" He looked at me, and for a second I thought he was going to tell me. But then he just shook his head. "I don't want to talk about it." And that was it. He never said another word about it, no matter how many times I asked. Whatever happened during that lockdown, whatever made him disappear for those few hours, he refused to talk about it. It was just another regular day at school. You know, the kind that blends into all the others. Classes were dragging on as usual, and I was barely paying attention. The morning had passed like any other. Boring lectures, some gossip in the hallways, a few laughs during lunch. I remember thinking about the weekend, already counting down the hours until I could leave. I wasn't expecting anything different to happen. We were in the middle of fourth period when the loudspeaker crackled to life, and the principal's voice echoed through the room. "We are going into lockdown. This is not a drill." At first, I thought I misheard. Everyone else in the classroom seemed confused too. Usually they warn us when we're about to have a drill, but this time, there was no warning. The teacher, Mr. Harris, immediately got up from his desk, telling us to lock the doors and move to the back of the room. We all knew the routine: lock the doors, turn off the lights, and stay quiet. But something about the way Mr. Harris looked told me this wasn't like the other drills. We all crouched down behind our desks, trying to stay out of sight from the door's narrow window. The lights were off, and the room was dead silent, except for the sound of shuffling as we adjusted ourselves. A couple of kids whispered to each other, asking if anyone knew what was going on. No one had any answers. All I could think was, this isn't right. A few minutes passed in complete silence. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. I remember wondering if this was all some big mistake. Maybe the principal had just been overcautious, or maybe it really was just a poorly planned drill. But then, we heard it. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. A sound coming from the hallway. Someone was shouting, but it was too far away to make out the words. It sounded like a man, yelling something, but it was muffled. The entire class froze, eyes wide, trying to figure out what was happening. Mr. Harris glanced toward the door, his face tense, but he stayed silent, holding up a hand as if telling us to stay calm. Then the shouting stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. We sat there, waiting. I don't know how much time passed, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, but it felt like an eternity. My legs were starting to cramp from crouching behind the desk. I shifted slightly, trying to get comfortable without making any noise. The girl next to me, Sarah, was shaking, and I could hear her shallow breathing. Everyone was scared, but no one wanted to admit it. Then, we heard something else. A new sound. The door handle rattled. At first, it was just a slight noise like someone was gently testing it. But then it got louder, more aggressive. Someone was trying to force the door open. The handle shook violently, and the sound echoed through the room. My heart stopped. Whoever it was, they were trying to get in. Mr. Harris motioned for us to stay quiet, his finger pressed to his lips. We all held our breath, staring at the door, waiting to see if it would give in. The door held, thank God, but the sound of the rattling handle continued. It was relentless, like whoever was on the other side wasn't going to stop until they got in. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. It was like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. We waited for what felt like hours, but no more sounds came from the hallway. No more shouting, no more rattling. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the loudspeaker crackled to life again. "The lockdown has been lifted. You may return to your regular schedule." Everyone looked around, confused. Return to our regular schedule? Just like that? We'd just been through what felt like the longest, most terrifying moment of our lives, and now we were just supposed to go back to class like nothing had happened? But Mr. Harris stood up, his face pale, and told us to gather our things. Slowly, everyone began standing up, packing their bags like we were just going to go back to normal. I remember walking out of the classroom in a daze, my legs feeling weak. The hallway was buzzing with students talking about what had just happened. No one knew what it was, who had tried to get into the classroom, or why the lockdown had been called. But as I made my way down the hall, something caught my attention. The door to the janitor's closet was wide open, Now, that might not seem like a big deal, but here's the thing, no one ever went in there during the day. The janitor, Mr. Lawson, was an older guy, quiet and kind of invisible, honestly. You'd only see him in the early morning or after school when the place was empty. And that closet? Always locked. Curiosity got the better of me. I shouldn't have done it, but I walked over to the open door and peeked inside. What I saw made my stomach drop. On the floor was a janitor's uniform, Mr. Lawson's uniform, crumpled and thrown carelessly to the side. Next to it, a crowbar. The sight of that crowbar made my blood run cold. Someone had been trying to break into the classrooms and they'd been dressed as the janitor. But where was Mr. Lawson? I looked around the hallway, but no one else seemed to have noticed the open closet. Everyone was too busy talking, sharing their own theories about what had just happened. My mind raced. Had Mr. Lawson been involved in this? Or had something happened to him? The thought that someone else had been posing as him during the lockdown made my skin crawl. I wanted to tell someone, but who would believe me? The door to the closet was still open, but I didn't dare go inside. My mind was spinning with possibilities. None of them good. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. Every time I saw a teacher or walked by another classroom, I wondered if they knew what I had seen. But no one said anything. The day ended and everyone went home like normal, as if we hadn't just experienced something terrifying. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept going back to the janitor's closet, the uniform on the floor and the crowbar. I tried to convince myself that there had to be an explanation. Maybe Mr. Lawson had left in a hurry, or maybe it was just a coincidence. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next morning, when I got to school, there were police cars parked outside. The principal made an announcement saying that the school was being searched as a precaution, but they didn't give any details. No one mentioned Mr. Lawson. He wasn't there that day, and as far as I know, he never came back. I never found out what really happened during that lockdown, but I have my suspicions. Someone had been inside the school, pretending to be Mr. Lawson, and they'd tried to break into our classroom, but why? And where was the real janitor? The school day began like any other. Sunlight streamed through the windows, students chatted, eager for the bell. A normal day, deceptively ordinary. The air buzzed with the usual energy. Laughter echoed off the lockers. Teachers prepped for their lessons. No one suspected the chaos that lurked just beyond the horizon. The bell rang, students shuffled to their classes, notebooks opened, the drone of lectures began. It was a scene played out in schools across the country, a scene soon to be shattered. A high-pitched shriek pierced the air. It was the fire alarm. Students exchanged confused glances. This was not a drill day. The teacher's face tightened. "Everyone, line up quickly." Her voice was sharp, urgent. Something was wrong. This was no ordinary fire drill. Students scrambled out of their seats. The orderly line dissolved into a panicked surge. Adrenaline surged through the room. The air crackled with fear. Instead of heading outside, the teacher herded the students into a darkened storeroom. Confused whispers filled the cramped space. What was happening? "Quiet!" the teacher hissed, her voice a low murmur in the darkness. "Stay silent, stay hidden." Her words did little to calm the rising tide of fear. The only light came from the sliver of a window high on the wall. Outside, sirens wailed. Their chilling sound sent shivers down everyone's spines. Time seemed to stop. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The silence was broken only by the panicked thumping of hearts. Each tick of the clock amplified the tension. Fear hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket. What if someone found them? What if the danger was inside the school? Every creak of the floorboard sent a jolt of terror through the room. Outside, the sirens continued their relentless wail. The sound was a constant reminder of the unseen threat lurking just beyond the storeroom door. Section 5. Faces of Fear. In the dim light, faces were etched with fear. The atmosphere was thick with tension, every creak of the floorboards and rustle of paper amplifying the sense of dread. The students, usually so full of life and energy, were now reduced to mere shadows of their former selves. Their eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of hope or escape, but finding none. Friends clung to each other, seeking comfort in shared terror. Some cried silently, their tears a testament to the overwhelming fear that gripped their hearts. The bonds of friendship, forged in happier times, now served as lifelines in this moment of crisis. The quiet sobs and whispered reassurances were the only sounds that broke the oppressive silence. Others stared blankly ahead, lost in their own private nightmares. Their minds raced with thoughts of what might happen next, each scenario more terrifying than the last. The weight of the unknown pressed heavily on their young shoulders, leaving them paralyzed with fear. The once familiar classroom now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on them with each passing second. The teacher, her face pale but composed, kept watch by the door. She was a pillar of strength in the midst of chaos, her presence a beacon of hope for her students. Despite the fear that gnawed at her insides, she maintained a calm exterior, knowing that her students needed her to be strong. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the frightened faces of her charges, each one a reminder of the responsibility she bore. Her grip on her phone was white-knuckled. The device was her lifeline, her only means of communication with the outside world. She clung to it as if it were a talisman, willing it to bring news of safety and rescue. Every vibration, every ring sent a jolt of hope through her, only to be dashed when it was not the call she so desperately awaited. She was their only connection to the outside world, their only hope. The students looked to her for reassurance, their eyes pleading for some sign that everything would be okay. She spoke in hushed tones, trying to convey a sense of calm and control, even as her own heart raced with fear. Each word was carefully chosen, each sentence a delicate balance between truth and comfort. The weight of responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders. She knew that her actions in these moments could mean the difference between panic and calm, between hope and despair. The burden was immense, but she bore it with grace and determination. Her students needed her to be their rock, their anchor in the storm, and she was determined not to let them down. She had to be strong for her students, even as her own heart pounded with fear. The fear was a constant companion, a shadow that followed her every move, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the needs of her students. She offered words of comfort, a steady hand, a reassuring smile, all the while battling the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. In that dimly lit classroom, surrounded by faces of fear, she stood as a testament to the power of courage and compassion. Section 6. The longest hour. An hour crawled by, then another. Still, they remained huddled in the darkness, the silence punctuated by the chilling soundtrack of sirens and distant shouts. Rumors spread through the room like wildfire, each more terrifying than the last. An armed robbery gone wrong, a disgruntled student. No one knew for sure. The lack of information only amplified the terror. Their imaginations ran wild, conjuring up scenarios far more horrifying than reality. Section 7. A glimmer of hope. Finally, a voice boomed through the school's PA system. The lockdown was over. The announcement echoed through the empty hallways, a stark contrast to the silence that had gripped the school for hours. It was a moment everyone had been waiting for, a signal that the immediate danger had passed. Relief washed over the room, followed by a wave of shaky laughter and tears. Students who had been huddled together in fear now found themselves overwhelmed with emotion. Some clung to each other, their faces wet with tears, while others laughed nervously, trying to shake off the tension that had built up inside them. They emerged from their hiding place, blinking in the sudden brightness. The transition from the dim, confined spaces to the open, well-lit hallways was almost surreal. It felt like stepping into a different world, one where the nightmare they had just endured was already starting to feel like a distant memory. The hallway, once so familiar, now seemed alien and unsettling. The usual hustle and bustle of school life was replaced by an eerie stillness. Lockers stood silent, and the walls, which had witnessed countless moments of joy and learning, now seemed to echo with the remnants of fear and uncertainty. The air thrummed with a nervous energy. Students moved cautiously, their eyes darting around as if expecting the shadows to come alive. The sense of vulnerability was palpable, a reminder that their sanctuary had been breached. Students embraced, their faces a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The hugs were tighter, the words of comfort more earnest. In those moments they found solace in each other, drawing strength from the shared experience. It was a testament to their resilience, a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. The ordeal was over, but its impact would be felt for a long time to come. As they sat in their classrooms, reflecting on what had happened, the weight of the experience settled in. It was a day that would be etched in their memories, a reminder of their vulnerability, but also of their strength. The school would eventually return to its routine, but the scars of this day would remain, a silent testament to the resilience of its students and staff. Section 8. The aftermath. The school buzzed with activity. Police officers, their faces grim, moved through the hallways. Parents rushed to collect their children, their faces etched with worry. The ordinary routine of the school day had been shattered, replaced by a sense of vulnerability and unease. The invisible threat had receded. but its shadow lingered. Counselors were on hand, offering comfort and support. But for many, the emotional scars of that day would take much longer to heal. Section 9. Scars remain. The days that followed were strange and subdued. The usual chatter and laughter seemed muted. The carefree atmosphere had vanished, replaced by a palpable tension. Students jumped at sudden noises. They avoided certain hallways, their minds replaying the fear of that day. The memory of the lockdown lingered, a dark cloud hanging over the school. The incident had shaken their sense of safety, leaving them feeling vulnerable and exposed. The world outside the school walls no longer seemed so secure. Section 10. Unanswered questions. Despite the return to normalcy, questions lingered. Who was the intruder? What were their motives? Why had they targeted the school? The answers remained elusive. The lack of closure only fueled the anxiety. The unseen threat, though gone, continued to haunt their thoughts. The mystery of that day remained unsolved. The incident served as a stark reminder of the fragility of life, of the ever-present potential for chaos to erupt in the most ordinary of places. Section 11. Life after lockdown. Life went on. The school routine resumed. But things were different. The familiar sounds of lockers clanging and students chattering filled the hallways once more, but there was an underlying sense of change. The once mundane school environment now felt like a sanctuary, a place where they could reconnect and rebuild. The lockdown had left an indelible mark, a permanent reminder of the day their world changed. The empty hallways during the lockdown were now filled with life, but the memories of isolation lingered. Students often found themselves lost in thought, reflecting on the time they spent apart and the challenges they faced. The flag at half-mast served as a solemn reminder of the lives affected and the resilience required to move forward. The experience had forged a new sense of unity among the students. They had learned to appreciate the value of companionship and the strength found in togetherness. Group projects became more than just assignments. They were opportunities to bond and support one another. Helping each other with homework was no longer a chore, but a way to show care and solidarity. They had faced their fears together and emerged stronger. The classroom discussions were richer, filled with empathy and understanding. High fives and words of encouragement became common as they celebrated each other's successes and provided comfort during setbacks. The sense of community was palpable, and it was clear that they were no longer just classmates, but a family. The scars remained, but so did the resilience. The determined faces of the students told a story of perseverance and hope. They often gathered in circles, holding hands and sharing their experiences, finding strength in their collective journey. The reflective moments were a testament to their growth, as they navigated the complexities of their new reality with grace and determination. The lockdown had been a terrifying ordeal, but it had also been a powerful lesson in courage, resilience, and the importance of community. Assemblies became moments of inspiration, where speakers shared stories of overcoming adversity and the power of unity. Team-building activities were more meaningful, as they reinforced the bonds that had been strengthened during the lockdown. With arms around each other, the students knew they could face any challenge together. It was a day they would never forget, a day that would forever shape their lives. As they stood together, looking into the distance, they were filled with a sense of hope and determination. Walking away from school, they carried with them the lessons learned and the strength gained. Writing in their journals, they documented their journey, knowing that the experiences of the lockdown had forever changed them, making them more resilient, compassionate, and united.